Imagine walking into a 19th century farmhouse and seeing a man literally pinned against the ceiling beams by some unseen force.
Oh, wow.
Right, like he's pressed up so hard that his head and shoulders are actually moving the floorboards of the chamber above him.
It's just a staggering image.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's one that completely shatters our standard expectations of what historical records usually look like.
Yeah, because usually, when we study history, there is this expectation of precision, kind of like accounting.
Right,
You
exactly.
look up a date, you read a treaty, or you track the migration of a population, and the historian just points at the ledger and says, there it is, it happened on a Tuesday, it's clean. We like human events to be, categorized and measured.
But then you step into the world of early religious history, specifically the history of a brand new faith. And suddenly, that neat historical ledger is just thrown right out the window. We are looking at a landscape of human experience that completely defies our usual measurements. It forces us to confront things that, well, they simply don't fit neatly onto a timeline.
Absolutely. So welcome to another deep dive. Our mission today is exploring the intersection of faith, miracles, and the crucible of public persecution during the earliest days of a major American religion.
Yeah, we are looking at the founding era of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Now, before we really get into the details, I need to set the stage for you regarding our sources today. Because the stack we're looking at includes scriptural texts, historical manuscripts dating back to 1839, biographical records, and even secular courtroom transcripts.
Which is quite the mix.
It is. And I want to be incredibly clear up front here. These sources contain deeply religious and spiritually charged claims.
Yes. And our goal today is absolutely not to take a side.
Right.
Nor are we here to endorse the religious viewpoints of the content. We are basically acting as historical detectives. Our objective is to impartially unpack this fascinating historical narrative exactly as it's contained in these original records.
We are just here for the story. And let me tell you what a story it is. Because waiting for you in today's deep dive is a 20-year-old farmhand. That terrifying exorcism resulting in the ceiling beam levitation I just mentioned, a dramatic courtroom showdown, and a really profound exploration of what everyday people are willing to sacrifice for their deepest convictions.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. So let's unpack this. Before we get to the levitation and the courtroom drama of 1830, we have to establish the blueprint for miracles as defined by our sources.
Right, we need to know the ground rules.
Exactly. And we also need to meet the completely ordinary family that helped launch this entire movement.
So looking at the scriptural texts in our stack, they provide a very specific theological framework for what a miracle actually is.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Well, if we look at the biblical examples that are mentioned in the text, like Jesus turning water to wine in Cana, or healing a paralytic who was lowered through a roof.
Oh, yeah, the guy on the bed.
Right. Or curing a man at the pool of Bethesda who had been infirm for 38 years. The sources emphasize that miracles are never just, random divine parlor tricks.
Right. They aren't magic shows.
Exactly. They are fundamentally a form of teaching. They carry a very specific lesson for the people witnessing them. What's fascinating here is that, according to the text, miracles never happen in a vacuum.
They need a catalyst.
Yes, they are never wrought without three specific ingredients: prayer, a genuinely felt need, and deep faith. The text explicitly says that without faith among the children of men, God can do no miracle among them.
So the faith has to precede the miracle.
Exactly.
Okay, I want you to keep that in your back pocket because that brings us to the Knight family.
A crucial part of the story.
So crucial. In 1826, Joseph Smith was not known as a prophet. He was just a 20-year-old single guy working as a hired hand on a farm and sawmill in Colesville, New York. And his employers were Joseph Knight Sr. and his wife, Polly.
And this family becomes incredibly pivotal to literally everything that follows.
I really like to think of Joseph Knight Sr. and Polly as the ultimate angel investors. Like in a modern startup, just in a 19th century religious context.
That is a great way to put it.
Think about it. Before Joseph Smith had any product to show the world, before there was a church or a published book, the Knights provided the crucial seed capital.
The physical necessities.
Yeah. Joseph Knight Sr. gave the young Joseph Smith a horse and sleigh so he could go court his future wife, Emma. He gave him money, shoes, and provisions.
It is utterly practical material support. I mean, when Joseph and Emma were really struggling to survive while Joseph was trying to translate the golden plates, the Knights showed up with a barrel of mackerel, bushels of grain, potatoes, and lined paper.
Which doesn't sound like a big deal to us today.
Right. But lined paper was a precious commodity in rural New York at the time. It was expensive and really hard to come by in bulk.
Wow.
And that specific lined paper is literally what parts of the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon were written on.
That's wild.
Yeah, without that mackerel to keep them fed and that paper to write on, the translation process might have just ground to a halt completely.
That material support yielded some incredible historical anecdotes, too. One of my absolute favorite details is the wagon.
Oh, the wagon story is great.
So when the time came for Joseph Smith to finally retrieve the golden plates, he actually borrowed Joseph Knight Sr.'s wagon to go get them. And when he got back, Joseph told Father Knight that the plates were, quote, 10 times better than I expected.
Which is such a genuine reaction.
It really is.
Yeah.
But the best part is that he was even more blown away by the translating glasses that came with them. In the historical record, he tells Knight, I can see anything. They are marvelous. Marvelous spelt, phonetically.
It is such a humanizing moment in the record. You have these grand spiritual claims intersecting with a borrowed farm wagon and a young man's sheer amazement at these objects.
Right. But this practical, quiet support from the Knight family is about to collide with a terrifying, entirely unquiet spiritual event.
A major shift in the narrative.
Big time. We're moving to April 1830. The church has just been officially organized. Joseph Smith is visiting the Knights in Colesville, and he asks Joseph Knight Sr.'s adult son, Newel Knight, to pray vocally at a meeting.
Which is a seemingly simple, mundane request for a religious gathering.
Super simple, but Newel makes excuses. According to Joseph Smith's history, Newel uses this metaphor about a mud hole. He says if he fell into a mud hole carelessly, he'd rather get himself out than have others help.
Basically, he's avoiding the public prayer.
Yeah, he basically says he'll wait until he can get into the woods by himself the next morning and he'll pray there.
And so the following morning, Newel goes to the woods. He tries to pray, but he fails. He writes that he felt he hadn't done his duty in front of the others.
The guilt is setting in.
Exactly. And suddenly, this oppressive, uneasy feeling comes over him. It gets so intensely bad that by the time he stumbles back into his house, his wife Sally is utterly terrified by his appearance.
Oh, man.
His face and limbs begin to wildly distort. The text says he is twisted in every shape possible to imagine. And then he is actually caught up off the floor and tossed about most fearfully.
It's just a horrific physical manifestation. His family and neighbors rush in, and they are witnessing this. Newel begs his wife to fetch Joseph Smith.
Right, he needs help.
So Joseph arrives, and Newel cries out, begging him to cast the devil out of him. Now, keep in mind, Joseph has never done this before, but he grabs Newel's hand, and he commands the devil to depart in the name of Jesus Christ.
And the change in the room is instantaneous. The contortions just stop completely.
Wow.
Newel slumps to the floor, exhausted, and mutters that he literally saw the devil leave his body.
Which is intense enough on its own.
Yeah, but the event doesn't end there. The sources say the Spirit of God then descends upon Newel, and he levitates.
The ceiling beams.
Yes. He is physically lifted up until his head and shoulders press so hard against the ceiling beams that it actually moves the floorboards of the chamber above them. Suspended there, Newel has a vision of Christ seated at the right hand of God, very much like the biblical Stephen the Martyr.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I have to push back a little on the causality here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Why did such a simple request, just asking a guy to pray out loud in a meeting, trigger such a violent reaction? It is incredibly tempting for a modern listener to diagnose this through a 21st century psychological lens.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, could this be a manifestation of extreme performance anxiety that triggered a psychogenic non-epileptic seizure? Or do we have to read this as a literal, external, spiritual battle?
Well, it is completely natural for us to want to apply a clinical diagnosis to something so extreme. A panic attack that spirals into a physical seizure makes a lot of sense to our modern worldview.
It feels cleaner.
Right. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the historical sources force us to look through an 1830s lens. When a man stops convulsing on a dime at a verbal command and then physically floats to the ceiling, the observers in that room aren't thinking about psychology or performance anxiety.
No, they definitely aren't.
They are seeing a literal spatial battle between God and the devil. The historical record explicitly positions this as a physical demonstration of authority. Joseph Smith himself recorded this as the very first miracle performed in the newly organized church.
The very first one.
Yeah. And going back to our blueprint of miracles, the theological takeaway from the sources is clear. Joseph testified that this was done not by man, but by the power of God.
A demonstration of authority that immediately caught the attention of the neighbors. Because miracles, especially ones where people are levitating against ceiling beams, do not happen in a vacuum.
News travels fast.
Especially in a quiet farming community, suddenly you have rumors of exorcisms and levitations buzzing through town, and that public reaction was swift and it was severe.
Very severe. By June and July of 1830, this supernatural event, combined with a growing number of local baptisms, including Emma Smith's, actually sparked intense local backlash. Opponents actually tore down a physical dam that the church members had built in a stream to perform baptisms.
We should probably explain why the neighbors cared about a dam. It wasn't just, a random act of vandalism.
Right. The stream was a public utility. The early church members needed deep water to practice full immersion baptism. But to the local community, this new, zealous religious group was monopolizing public space, claiming local souls, and creating a massive social disruption.
So tearing down the dam was a physical rejection of their presence in the community.
Exactly.
And that physical rejection quickly escalates into legal trouble. Joseph Smith is arrested under the charge of being a disorderly person and setting the country in an uproar.
Which is such a vague charge.
It really is. A disorderly person charge in 1830s New York was essentially a catch-all disturbing the peace law. It was highly vague, and it was often used politically to harass people who were considered a nuisance or a threat to the social order.
And the series of arrests that follow are just straight out of a thriller.
Seriously, they are.
The first constable who arrests Joseph actually ends up saving him from an ambush by a mob. They make this high-speed escape in a wagon, a wheel falls off. They manage to frantically get it back on.
In the middle of an escape.
Yeah. And that night, the friendly constable sleeps with his feet against the door and a loaded musket by his side just to protect his prisoner.
But the relief is short-lived. As soon as Joseph is acquitted in that county, a second, highly hostile constable arrests him on a new warrant for a neighboring county.
And this guy's just awful.
He really is. He starves Joseph, giving him only crusts of bread and water. At night, he forces Joseph to sleep pinned against a wall, with the constable's arm wrapped around him so he can't escape.
And this relentless harassment leads to the trial in Broome County. The historical record of the courtroom cross-examination provides incredible insight into how these early believers defended their faith under immense pressure.
Oh, this is the trial of the century, 1830s style.
It really is.
So they call Newel Knight to the witness stand. The opposing lawyer, a Mr. Seymour, is aggressive. He wants to trap Newell to make him sound absolutely crazy in front of the judge.
He's going for the jugular.
Exactly. He drills into the exorcism. He asks, "Did Joseph Smith cast the devil out of you?" Newell says, "No, it was done by the power of God. Joseph was just the instrument."
But the lawyer keeps pressing. He wants a physical, material description of a spiritual event that he can mock for the courtroom.
Right, so the lawyer asks, "Pray, what did the devil look like?" Another lawyer actually advises Newell he doesn't have to answer that. But Newell is sharp.
So sharp.
He says to Mr. Seymour, "I'll answer it if you answer one question for me first. Do you, Mr. Seymour, profess to understand the things of the Spirit?"
And the lawyer walks right into the trap. He says, "No, I do not pretend to such big things."
And Newell delivers the absolute punchline of the trial. He looks at the lawyer and says, "Well then, 'twould be of no use to tell you what the devil looked like, for it was a spiritual sight, and of course you would not understand it."
It's brilliant.
The whole courtroom erupts in laughter. Mr. Seymour is completely humiliated. Joseph is acquitted. And even that hostile constable ends up apologizing to Joseph.
That's a massive turnaround.
I just love this because it is like trying to measure the wind with a ruler. The lawyer wanted a physical description to cross-examine under the rigid, secular rules of a 19th century courtroom. And Newell basically said, "You don't have the right equipment to measure what I saw."
That's a perfect analogy. And the historical outcome of this intense period of trial and persecution was a specific revelation, which is now known as Doctrine and Covenants, Section 24.
What does it say?
Well, in it, Joseph and his followers are essentially advised to expect ongoing affliction. The text doesn't promise wealth or an easy path. It promises divine protection, sure, but it guarantees that the cross they are taking up will be very heavy.
Which is exactly what happens. Because winning a legal battle in 1830 didn't stop the social bleeding. The neighbors didn't suddenly accept them because a judge ruled in their favor.
No, the tension just kept building.
And this brings us to the actual grueling cost of their devotion. We are talking about a decades-long marathon of maintaining faith in the face of immense, crushing loss. The statistical and geographic reality of the Knight family's devotion is staggering.
It really is. Over the next 14 years, the Knight family moved en masse. We're talking 62 relatives moving together.
62 people.
Think about the logistical nightmare of coordinating 62 people, their wagons, their livestock, and their food supplies across a frontier. And they didn't just move. They gave up their private property to live in cooperative religious orders.
We should probably clarify what a cooperative religious order meant in this context.
Yeah, good point.
They were pooling their resources. They were actually signing over the deeds to their lands and consecrating their property to the church to ensure that the poor among them were cared for.
Yeah.
It was an incredibly radical financial commitment.
A commitment that left them very vulnerable. They were violently driven from New York to Ohio to Missouri to Illinois and eventually out west into the wilderness. The forces say they helped pioneer 10 different settlements.
10 settlements.
Financially, the estimated loss for the family was around $16,000 in 1830s money.
Which translates to over $500,000 today. They lost homes, barns, orchards, grist mills, but the human toll was far, far worse than the financial one.
Unbearably worse.
During a brutal winter expulsion from Missouri, where women and children were literally walking barefoot on frozen ground, Newell's first wife, Sally, the woman who had been so terrified by his contortions in Colesville, died of malaria and exposure.
Newell actually wrote in his journal that she died a martyr to the gospel.
It's heartbreaking. Eventually, Newell remarries a woman named Lydia, and their wedding is incredibly significant in the historical record because it is the first marriage performed by priesthood authority by Joseph Smith.
Right. And in their theology, priesthood authority meant Joseph claimed restored divine authorization from God to perform sacred ordinances that bound a couple together eternally, not just until death do you part, like a standard civil marriage.
Exactly. And even after Joseph Smith is murdered in Carthage jail years later, Newell's loyalty to that authority doesn't waver. He writes that it feels as if his very heartstrings will break. But Newell doesn't survive the arduous journey west either.
No, he doesn't.
In January 1847, at just 47 years old, Newel Knight dies of exposure on the freezing plains of Nebraska.
Leaving a very poignant epilogue for his wife, Lydia.
Yeah. The historical records tell us that Lydia was left a widow on the frontier with 7 young children. And in her intense grief, she has a vision. A smiling Newell appears to her and says, "It was necessary that I should go. I was needed behind the veil. Dry up your tears."
And just for listeners who might be unfamiliar with the terminology, the veil, spelled with an A in 19th century text, is a religious metaphor for the boundary between the living and the afterlife. Newell was basically telling her his work was continuing on the other side of that boundary.
Okay, let's unpack this because I think a lot of people today view the concept of a miracle as a cure-all. You know, like winning the spiritual lottery.
Right, a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Exactly. But if Newel Knight experienced the ultimate divine miracle in 1830, literally being lifted to the ceiling by the Spirit of God, having a vision of Christ, why did his life end in such grueling hardship, dying of cold in a wagon out on the plains?
It's heavy paradox.
Clearly, looking at this history, a miracle was an initiation into hardship, not a free pass out of it.
This raises an important question about how historical evidence is weighed and the psychological weight of what we call the family witness.
Tell me more about that.
When historians look at Joseph Smith, they often focus on the official, formalized witnesses. You know, the 3 or the 8 men who claim to have seen the golden plates and whose names are printed in the front of the book.
The signatures everyone knows.
Right.
Yeah.
But the sources we're reviewing today present a different, arguably more profound kind of evidence.
The Knights.
Yes, the Knights. None of the Knights were official witnesses to the golden plates, but their sheer endurance through severe poverty, public humiliation, the loss of their wealth, and the deaths of their spouses serves as a massive living witness to Joseph Smith's character.
It really is a unique sociological phenomenon because they knew him when he was 20, when he was just a broke farmhand working for them.
Exactly. The historical argument embedded in these records is so powerful. If Joseph Smith were a fraud or a charlatan, this massive clan of 62 people who knew him intimately before he was anyone of consequence would have abandoned him the moment their children started dying of exposure.
You would think so.
But they didn't. They followed him across the entire continent. The sources even mention a touching physical symbol of this loyalty. It was a cane that Joseph Smith gave to the aging Joseph Knight Sr. on the streets of Nauvoo, Illinois. The prophet actually insisted the cane be passed down through generations of Knights named Joseph, serving as a physical marker of this unbroken bond.
That is incredible. So what does this all mean? When we look back at the stack of sources today, we've traced an incredible journey.
A very long journey.
We started with a simple barrel of mackerel and some hard-to-find line paper that kept a young translator from going hungry. We witnessed a terrifying physical levitation in a small farmhouse chamber that defied every law of gravity.
And we sat in a rural courtroom listening to a witty young man refuse to let his spiritual sight be cross-examined by a secular lawyer.
Right. We watched as that initial burst of miraculous energy forged the unbreakable foundation of a family that crossed a continent, burying their loved ones in frozen ground for their beliefs.
It is a truly remarkable historical footprint left by ordinary people who were just caught up in extraordinary claims.
It really is, and it makes you wonder about your own life. When you strip away the history and look at the human element, what is your personal witness to the truth you hold dear?
That's the real question.
When the initial excitement of a new belief or new undertaking fades and the social backlash begins, what are you willing to sacrifice? What metaphorical freezing plains are you willing to cross for the things that you believe in?
You know, if we connect this back to where we started, the scriptural definition that a miracle is fundamentally meant to be a form of teaching, it leaves us with a lingering thought.
What's that?
What happens when a miracle passes from a lived, breathing experience into written history? When you read a 19th century journal about a man levitating against ceiling beams, does the ink on the page still have the power to teach the reader? Or does history itself eventually require the reader to take their own leap of faith to finally unlock its meaning?